A class is just a moving thing every time and so the values inside here are saved in the parameters in the constructor. So cart-OOP will be saved inside local storage key, and then we use it. And the same thing for cart-business. So again, the next problem. So now an method works like a normal method. Constructor. Scroll up in the class because we can group everything together inside the class. To create a constructor, we're going to scroll up in the class. And below these properties, we're going to create a new method called constructor, brackets and curly brackets. So the constructor method works like a normal method. We can put code inside and it will run the code. But the special thing about the constructor is that when we generate an object, it will run this constructor automatically. So this is a great place to put our setup code. So let's go down to the bottom. And here, instead of running the setup code outside the class, we're just going to move this into the class and into the constructor. So we'll select this code and then right click, cut, and scroll to the top. And inside the constructor, we're going to right click and paste. So now, after we create an object, it will run the code in the constructor and set up the object. So there's a few things that we need to fix here. The first thing is each object that we create is going to run the constructor, so we only need one of each of these lines. So let's remove the setup for the business card. Object that we create, constructor, click and click, cut. And scroll to the top. So we'll select this code and then right. Right click, cut, and scroll to the top. And inside the constructor, we're going to right click and paste. So now, after we create an object, it will run the code in the constructor and set up the object. So there's a few things that we need to fix here. The first thing is each object that we create is going to run the constructor, so we only need one of each of these lines. So let's remove the setup for the business card. So now the setup code has two steps. We set the local storage key, and then we load from storage. The next problem is that the object that we create is not going to be called cart every time. To solve this, we can replace cart with this, and here as well, this.load from storage. So as a reminder, this points to the object that we generate. So whatever object that we generate, we're going to get its local storage key and set it, and we're going to get its load from storage method and run that method. Now the second problem here is that we don't want local storage key to be cart-OOP every time. To fix this, the constructor can also have parameters. Let's give the constructor a parameter, and we'll name it local storage key. And instead of the same string every time, we're going to use local storage key. Now the last thing is, how do we save a value into this parameter? So if we scroll down to the bottom, when we call the class, between these brackets, we can put the parameters for the constructor. So for the cart, we want the local storage key to be the string cart-OOP. And for the business cart, we want the local storage key to be the string cart-business. So the values inside here are saved in the parameters in the constructor. So cart-OOP will be saved inside local storage key, and then we use it. And the same thing for cart-business. So now let's save this code and then open the console. And you'll see that the cart objects are correct. So after we generated each object, we also ran this setup code. So that's how the constructor works. Every time we generate an object, it will run the code inside here. So this is a great place to put setup code and make our code cleaner. So here are a few more details about the constructor. The method has to be named constructor. We can't just use any name that we want. We also should not return anything from a constructor. So lastly, a shortcut that we can use in a class is when we have a property and it's equal undefined, we can actually remove equal undefined and just use a semicolon. So this is the same thing as the code before. And same thing here. We can remove equal undefined and just use a semicolon and save. So we finished converting our code from using a function to using a class. And as you can see, a class is just a better way to generate objects in object-oriented programming. So now let's save our code into Git. We'll open the Git section. Inside cart-class, we created our cart class. And inside checkout.js, we're basically loading the cart-class file. So we'll type a message to describe this change. Create class version of cart and commit. Next, we're going to learn an important feature of classes called private properties and methods. So let's open our code again and open cart-class. And you'll see that this class has a property called local storage key. So this property is useful inside the class, but it's not really meant to be used outside the class. For example, at the bottom here, we could take this object, cart, and then change the local storage key using .local storage key equals something else. Now, this is a problem because it will mess up how this object works, and it will start saving to a different local storage key. So this is a common problem in programming, where if you're working on a team, somebody might accidentally change properties that they're not supposed to. To prevent this, classes let us make a property or a method private, which means it can only be accessed inside the class. So let's remove this line and scroll up. And to make local storage key private, we're just going to add a number sign in front, or a hash. And also inside the they're not supposed to. So this is a common change outside the class. For example, at the bottom here, so this property is useful inside the class, but it's not really meant to be used outside the class. For example, at the bottom here, we could take this object, cart, and then change the local storage key using .local storage key equals something else. Now, this is a problem because it will mess up how this object works, and it will start saving to a different local storage key. So this is a common problem in programming, where if you're working on a team, somebody might accidentally change properties that they're not supposed to. To prevent this, classes let us make a property or a method private, which means it can only be accessed inside the class. So let's remove this line and scroll up. And to make local storage key private, we're just going to add a number sign in front, or a hash. And also, whenever we access this property inside the class, we're going to add the hash in front. So we'll type this.hash local storage key, this.hash local storage key, and inside save to storage, this.hash local storage key. So this is called a private property. This means it can only be used inside this class, or inside these curly brackets. It cannot be used outside the class. A property without a hash in front is called a public property, meaning it can be accessed anywhere. So now let's save and open the console. And the code still works. So we made this property private, and we're able to access it inside the class. So now let's try accessing this property outside the class to see what happens. We're going to scroll down, and we're going to try to access cart.hash local storage key and change it to something else, like test, and save. And if we open our console, you'll see that when we try to access a private property here, it will give us a syntax error saying this is a private field. And by the way, a field is the same thing as a property. So that's how a private property works. It prevents us from accessing this property outside the object and messing it up. We can also have private methods. So let's remove this line and scroll up. And the method load from storage should also only be used inside this class. There's really no reason for code outside to be calling load from storage. So to make our code safer, we're going to make this a private method. To make a method private, we're going to do the same thing. In front of the method, we're going to add a number sign or a hash. And we're going to update the rest of our code. So we're going to do this dot hash load from storage. And now we can save and check the console to make sure that everything is still working. So everything still looks good because we're only using this private method inside this class. So a class lets us create private properties and methods. And this is useful on a bigger project where people might not be sure which properties and methods they're supposed to use outside the class and which ones to avoid. So now let's save our changes into Git. We'll go into the Git section, and inside here, we made local storage key and load from storage private. We'll create a message to describe these changes. Make local storage key and load from storage private and commit. Load from storage private. And commit. Now that we learned object-oriented programming and classes, we're going to use it in our project. So one thing we could do is to take this cart class and replace everywhere we use cart in our project. However, we use cart in a lot of places, and this would take too much time. So I'm going to leave replacing the cart as a challenge exercise. Instead, we're going to work on the home page. So first, let's go back to our code, and we're going to open checkout.js, and we're just going to comment out this import because we're just using this file for practice. So let's save this, and then let's open the checkout page. So I already have it open. If you don't have it open, you can use this file for practice. And we're going to open checkout.js, and we're just going to comment out this import because we're just using this file for practice. So let's save this, and then let's open the checkout page. So I already have it open. If you don't have it open, you can right-click checkout.html and open with live server. On the checkout page, we're going to click this icon in the top left to go to the home page. On this page, we have a list of products here. And the code for these products is, if we go back to VS Code, and on the left side, we're going to open data/products.js. So here is the code or the data for all the products on the homepage. And you'll notice that each product is an object. We're going to learn a technique called converting an object into a class. So what this means is, instead of using regular objects in this array, we're going to use a class to generate these objects. So above this array, let's create a new class using the word class, and let's call it capital P product and curly brackets, because this class is meant to generate products. So now each of our products is going to have some properties like the ID, image, and the name. So let's add these to the class. We'll add the ID property and a semicolon so that it starts off as undefined, and then an image property and a name property. And each product will also have a rating and the price sets. Rating and price sets. And you'll notice each object here also has a property called keywords. Now we're not currently using this in our project, so we're going to leave it out of the class for now. And if we need to use it later, we can always add it back in. So now we have all the properties that we want for each product. So now let's test this by generating a product using this class. So down here, let's create a variable const product1 equals, and to generate an object, we're going to use the word new, and then the class name, capital P product, and brackets. And let's console.log this to see if it worked. Console.log product1 and save. So now we're going to open the web page and then open the console. So right click and inspect and open the console. And inside here, you'll see that we created a product object using the class. So right now, all of these properties are undefined. So now let's set the values of these properties. We'll go back to our code. Don't follow along here, but one way to set these properties is to access them outside the class. For example, product1.id equals something, and then do product1.image equals something, and then product1.name, and so on. So this is not a good way to set these properties because we have to do this for each product that we create, so it makes our code repetitive and messy. Instead, notice that when we create a product, this is kind of like the setup code. We create a product and then set all of its properties. And remember, classes have a specific feature for setup code called the constructor. And now you can follow along. So inside this class, we're going to create a constructor, brackets and curly brackets. So whenever we generate an object, it's going to automatically run this constructor. So this constructor is where we should put our setup code. So let's remove this code and then do all of that inside the constructor. So first, we want to set the ID property. We're going to do this.id and make it equal. And now what value do we set the ID to? So the value of the ID is inside each of these objects. So when we create a product up here, we're going to put this object inside these brackets. And then that's going to go into the constructor in here. So in the constructor, let's create a parameter to save this data. So we'll name it product details. And now to save something inside this parameter, we're going to put it between these brackets. So let's actually give this entire object to the constructor. So we're going to right click and copy. And then between these brackets, we're going to right click and paste. So whenever we create a new product, we're going to give it this object with all the details. It's going to get saved in here. And now we can set the properties. So this .id is going to be equal to the product details.id property. So product details.id. And for the image, we're going to do this.image equals the properties. A new product, we're going to give it this object with all the details. It's going to get saved in here and paste. And copy. And then between these brackets, we're going to right click and paste. So whenever we create a new product, we're going to give it this object with all the details. It's going to get saved in here. And now we can set the properties. So this .id is going to be equal to the product details.id property. So product details.id. And for the image, we're going to do this.image equals the product details, which is this object that we passed in, dot the image property. Same thing for the name. So same thing for the rates. This.price cents equals the product details.price cents. So this is called converting an object into a class. What we're doing is we're basically taking a regular object like this, we put it inside a class, and then we copy over the properties. You can also visualize it like this. We have a regular object, and we're basically wrapping it inside a class. And the reason we do this is that classes have extra features we can use. Like we can add methods, and we can also have private properties and private methods. So we basically have the same object as before, except we have an enhanced version of that object. It has some extra features from classes. So for now, let's save this code. And then down here, we console.log product1. So let's take a look at it in our console. So we'll open the console. And now we can see that we created a product object. So it's the same object as before, except now it's enhanced. It has some extra features from classes. So next, we're going to take this technique and apply it to this entire array. So instead of having an array of regular objects, we're going to convert each of these objects into the product class. Now, one way we could do this is that in front of the object, we can just type new product, open bracket, and then close bracket at the bottom. And this will essentially convert this regular object into the product class. However, we're going to have to repeat this code for every object in the array, and it's going to be a lot of work and repetition. So instead, let's just loop through this array and then use code to convert each of these objects. So instead of typing this out manually, we're going to remove this and remove the round bracket at the end. And then I'm going to click this arrow beside the array to collapse it. And at the end of the array, we're going to use an array method called .map and brackets. So map basically loops through an array, and for each value, it runs a function. So we're going to give this a function that we want to run for each value. So arrow and curly brackets. And this inner function is going to get a parameter. So this parameter is basically each value in the array. So it's going to take the first value and then save it inside this parameter, run the function, and then take the second value, save it in here, run the function, third value, save it, and run the function. So let's name this parameter the product details, because each object in this array contains product details. So now it's going to take each object, save it in the parameter, and run the function. And here, we're going to convert the object into a class. To do that, we're going to use the code new capital P product brackets, and we're going to give it this regular object, which is the product details. And now there's a second part to how map works. So .map creates a new array, and whatever we return from this inner function is going to go inside that new array. So here, we're going to return this class. So this result is going to be put inside a new array. So you can think of map as we take each value in an array, we run this function on it, and we transform it, and then put it inside a new array. So here, we're essentially we run this function on it, and we transform it, and then put it inside a new array. So you can think of map as we take each value in an array, we run this function on it, and we transform it, and then put it inside a new array. So here, we're essentially transforming each of these products, or these regular objects, into a class. So at the bottom, let's console.log the products array to confirm this. So we'll save and open the console. And now you can see we have an array, and each of the values is a product class instead of just a regular object. So we converted all of our products from regular objects into this product class. And now let's open the web page to make sure that everything still works. So if we open the page, you'll notice that everything is still working correctly. And that's because we have the exact same objects as before, except they're now just sort of enhanced objects. Next, let's use those extra features of classes to simplify our code for this page. We'll go back to our code, and on the left side, let's open amazon.js. So this is the code that creates the home page. So in here, we're going to scroll down until we see the rating section, where we calculate the stars and the rating count. So notice that inside our HTML, we're constructing this URL here for the number of stars a product has, and we're also creating the price that we want to display on the page. Now, instead of doing this all in the HTML, our code would be cleaner if we moved this logic into our class, because we want to group this related code together. So let's use the features of classes to make this code a little bit cleaner. We'll open products.js, and we'll scroll up to the product class. And inside here, let's add some methods for calculating the stars and the price. So we're going to add a method and call it get stars URL brackets and curly brackets. And let's create another method called get price brackets and curly brackets. And now we're going to move the code from our HTML into this class. So we'll open amazon.js. And then here, we're creating the URL of the stars. So let's actually select all this code and right click, copy, and inside products.js, inside get stars URL, we're going to right click and paste. And this is going to be a string. So at the front, let's add a backtick. So we're going to use a template string because we're going to insert a value inside. And at the end, we'll add another backtick. So now that we created the string, we're going to return it from this method. So return and semicolon at the end. And one thing we need to fix is that product is not defined anywhere. So to get the rating property of whatever object this is, we're going to use this.rating.stars. So now each product is able to construct its own stars URL here. So let's save this file. And then inside amazon.js, instead of doing this calculation directly inside the HTML, we're going to delete it, and we're going to insert the product.getStars URL method and brackets. So you notice that we have the same product object as before, but now it's sort of an enhanced product. We can add methods to group related code together and make our code cleaner. Let's do the same thing with the price down here. We're going to calculate this using the method instead of directly in the HTML. So we're going to select this code, and then right-click, copy, inside products.js, inside the getPrice method, we're going to right-click and paste. And again, we want to return the price as a string. So at the front, we'll create a template string because we're inserting a value, and at the back, a template string or a backtick. And we're going to return this from the method. And another thing we need to fix is that product is undefined. So to get the price sets property, we're going to use this.priceSets.